2026 is going to be a hot summer of panic as the radical left loses control of American culture and politics. Their powers have peaked, and they're now ebbing. The shadow regime is being gutted. The radical left insurgency is now publicly dominated by radical Islam, communists, and other branches of their radical cult. If they lose in November, they may fracture and die.
Wow.
Even their climate cult is dying. Europeans here for the World Cup are discovering that even American football arenas and big box stores have air conditioning while people die from heat stroke in Paris.
Yeah,
it looks like an American renaissance is beginning to break out in the most unlikely of places. And this is the reality. If the Dems lose the 2026 midterms, it's an existential catastrophe for them.
Good.
All the pressure is on them.
We gotta get
Not in
deep.
Brooklyn. That's their land.
Radicals
They have
out
to
of
win the swing
government.
districts, the districts that aren't dominated by DC spin.
These
Because what the
radical
average
people
American
that have
sees is that
radical
Iran is now
views.
taking our demands seriously, that Israel isn't elated, that it wasn't all about Israel. They see that Trump won, and he didn't let the neocons drag him into another forever war. The rest of it is just DC's insider spin cycle. The American people see that Trump has pivoted to addressing the Ukraine war next, and is committed to peace, while at the same time is funding a nuclear renaissance in the United States. But this video is going to dive deeper. We're going to look at how these radical operations that have taken over New York City were perfected in Eastern Europe, applied in the Americas, and then brought home. People like Gene Sharp and the Maidan, operations like mass censorship in Brazil, and how this entire radical Islam communist apparatus is a monster gone loose, which means more heartburn for Chuck Schumer. The kicker is that President Trump is now holding the Senate hostage until he gets the Save America Act passed. Because election fraud is the last standing pillar of their rainbow revolution. This is what the midterms are all about. And Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are well aware of what's at stake.
Change your body.
I'm Mike Steger,
No.
and this has been my fight for over 20 years.
Do not change your
If you
body.
sign up to our newsletter,
Do not mix your
subscribe,
DNA
and hit the
with
bell, then you're
AI.
helping not only to spread the word, but build the army to win the war and rebuild our nation.
God does exist.
Gene Sharp wrote the manual for the color revolutions in 1993, entitled From Dictatorship
Stop
to
thumbing your
Democracy.
nose at me.
Sharp wrote this in his field manual. Just as military officers must understand force structures, tactics, and the like in order to plot military strategy,
You're
political
thumbing your
defiance
nose.
planners
Not good.
must understand the nature and strategic principles of nonviolent struggle. The struggle is fought by psychological, social, economic, and political weapons applied by the population and the institutions of the society.
Economic.
Sharp took grants from the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, to fund his operation. The first revolution started in post-Soviet states, Serbia in 2000, Georgia in 2003, then Ukraine in 2004, and Kyrgyzstan in 2005. In 2004 in Ukraine, George Soros' network helped finance the Orange Revolution. Soros' own Ukrainian outfit spent $1.65 million between the autumn of 2003 and December 2004. Then that same outfit ran the exit polls that challenged the outcome of the election, leading to the coup. The Guardian reported total U.S. spending on the operation at roughly $65 million. The money flowed through its familiar names, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy, the same outfit that gave grants to Gene Sharp. This same operation was done under Obama in North Africa and the Middle East starting in 2011. The so-called Arab Spring installed the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo and put terrorists in control of Libya. The Associated Press reported that Sharp's work was circulating among Egyptian activists. And during the second generation of rainbow revolutions, social media platforms like Twitter were also incorporated. 2 years later, in February of 2013, General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Russia's top military officer, wrote an article, quote, "The value of science is in the foresight," where he wrote this, quote, "The experience of military conflicts, including those connected with the so-called color revolutions, confirmed that a perfectly thriving state, in a matter of months and even days, can be transformed into an arena of fierce armed conflict, become a victim of foreign intervention, and sink into a web of chaos, humanitarian catastrophe, and civil war. He said, quote, "The very rules of war have changed." The Russians had essentially declared that this USAID and National Endowment of Democracy funded operation was a new form of warfare. And just 10 months later, these same institutions launched the Maidan coup in Ukraine, creating the Donbass Civil War and eventually the war between Russia and Ukraine, killing hundreds of thousands of people. These operations indicate two clear factors. A public-private partnership has perfected a sophisticated method for waging war on nations. Regime change without firing a shot. A leading writer on X, Data Republican, has documented this via her study of the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003. She identifies 5 pillars to run a rainbow revolution. You can see her write-up in the description. These 5 pillars are the media, legal, elections, governance, and activists. The point that Gene Sharp understood is that the activists are key. They represent the population. Without them, it's just a bunch of elites and institutions. But the point here is that the activists have to take orders from the 4 other pillars. It has to be a coordinated military operation. If the radicals on the streets think they're calling the shots, and the monster is out of its cage.
Right.
The lunatics are running the asylum.
Right.
We'll come back to that point later. The second factor of these operations is that there is a clear desire to use this rainbow warfare to create an existential conflict with Russia.
Wow.
And when you look at it, this makes
Or flew
no
over the
sense.
cuckoo's nest.
Picking a fight with a nuclear superpower would create an existential world war, which forces the question, why? What could possibly
Yeah,
be
what
worth
could they
such
want?
an existential war? Put it in broad terms.
Money.
Their goal, these globalists, is global control. Money and war are just tools. And these globalist institutions have concluded something very critical, that a vibrant Western Christian civilization is intolerant of these globalist games.
Right.
Christianity in the West emerged in defiance of Rome's pagan and violent
Right.
culture. To install a
Because if
globalist
you
system,
find out that God's
Christianity
inside of
and
you,
the
you
West
don't
have
need
to
to
be
go to
destroyed.
church, therefore
And
you
what
don't
better
have to
way
trade your
than through
time.
European civil wars
You can't
like World
trade
War
your
I
time.
and World War II. These
They
wars
got
have
nothing to
nearly
offer. You
destroyed
won't
Western
trade.
Christian
You won't
civilization.
trade. You won't
But if we're
trade.
still
And the
standing,
whole game
if
is
we're
built
threatening a
on
revival,
trade.
then why not a third? And President Trump and his election in 2016 disrupted this second factor. We've seen this since 2017 with the Russiagate coup. At that point,
That's why
the full-scale
England's doing
rainbow
that.
operation
If they
was
see you
turned
won't
against the United
trade with
States
them,
from the
if
highest
you're
levels of
sovereign,
globalist
if you're
control.
free,
People
you
like
won't
Mark
trade.
Carney and Obama handled the elite
They can't
coordination,
offer you
while
money
puppets
for
like
nothing.
Zelensky, who have now met with the King of England 6 times since the war started, simply follow
Right
orders.
now they can offer
That's
you
why this
money and
war's the
you'll
hardest
take
to
it.
end, as President Trump often says. That's why what's happening in the Americas, in our Western Hemisphere, is a critical part of the strategic map. We're now reviving patriotic Christian nations throughout the entire hemisphere. On his first day back in office, President Trump froze U.S. foreign aid. Within weeks, USAID's website was down, its headquarters were closed, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that he was canceling 83% of USAID's programs, thousands of contracts worth tens of billions of dollars. By July, USAID had ceased to exist as an independent agency. It was folded into the State Department. The money that vanished wasn't the food and medicine they advertised. It was the democracy and governance money, the civil society grants, the election programs, the NGO web, and all of the UN cover. Add to this the taking out of the Maduro-Chavez narco regime in Venezuela, the rise of Bukele's El Salvador, and the increasing pressure on the narco-terrorists throughout the hemisphere, and leftist regimes in all of the Americas have lost significant funding and coordination. Since Trump came in, the political outcomes in the Americas have now been a massive sea change. Ecuador stayed conservative last April, but in October, Bolivia ended nearly 20 years of socialist rule. In November, Honduras elected a conservative president. In Chile, in December, the new president won a landslide against a communist candidate with the largest vote total in the country's history. This past February in Costa Rica, The right won an outright in the first round. In Colombia, this June, the Trump-endorsed candidate beat the leftist, putting an end to any collaboration with the drug cartels. And in Peru, conservative Keiko Fujimori is headed for the presidency, pending final certification. These are 7 elections, all in one direction. It's like mail-in ballots, but all in the other direction. Washington's Rainbow Operation spent decades sending dollars to NGOs to keep these leftist pro-narco governments afloat. And the moment Trump turned off the tap, they started to collapse. Brazil and Mexico remain the biggest holdouts. Mexico remains dependent on the United States economy, and we are confronting Mexico directly on trade, China, and the narcos. Brazil is the harder case. Brazil has been a leading target of the globalists and China for 35 years.
Yeah.
So let's consider Brazil, who will hold elections this October. First, consider that Alexandre Moraes, a justice on Brazil's Supreme Court, is a one-man censorship regime that sits above the president, above Congress, above the voters.
Doesn't sound too
He
good.
issued secret orders forcing social media companies
he
to
could shut
delete
anybody
accounts
down.
and erase posts. He jailed people for what they wrote online.
Yeah.
In 2024, he ordered Elon Musk's X shut down across all of Brazil.
Wow.
That's why Musk taking over X was such a big deal. Social media was developed as a tool of the rainbow revolutions. Now it has been turned against them. Then in September 2025, Brazil's Supreme Court convicted former conservative president Jair Bolsonaro for challenging the election and sentenced him to 27 years in prison. By November, he was behind bars. The front runner for the presidency was just taken off the board.
Wow.
But Moraes didn't invent the system. This is the same machine the U.S. ran during COVID through institutions like Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership and the State Department's Global Engagement Center.
Holy
The GEC, created by Obama in 2016, as
Right.
Mike Benz describes, was
Right.
turned from counterterrorism to counter-populism with Trump's win in 2016. In essence, as soon as it was set up, it was turned on the American people. When Rubio shut it down in April of 2025, he said it had spent millions of dollars to actively silence and censor the voices of Americans they were supposed to be serving.
Wow.
And that was the model. So when Trump gutted USAID and shut
Right.
down the GEC in 2025,
Right.
the Brazilian regime didn't just lose money and support. Rubio sanctioned Moraes and stripped his U.S. visa. Trump put tariffs on Brazil over the persecution of Bolsonaro.
Right.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva
Right.
quickly saw the writing on the wall and leaned into the China option. In May 2025, at a state banquet in Beijing, Rio Times reports that Lula personally asked Xi Jinping to send Chinese experts to help Brazil regulate its social media. Instead of becoming a sovereign nation opposed to censorship control, Brazil went with the Chinese social credit agenda, hoping to be a bulwark on behalf of globalist control in the Western Hemisphere. Since Bolsonaro's conviction, relations have stalemated between the U.S. and Brazil. But Bolsonaro's son is now running for president, and polls indicate that it's a dead heat. The elections will take place in October, prior to the U.S. midterms. And as nation after nation flips to patriotic governments, the rainbow regime is increasingly surrounded. As the USAID complex is folded up, the whole hemisphere is transforming. But American cities are clearly the greatest vulnerability to the American Republic.
Yep.
From major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, to mid-sized cities like Seattle and San Francisco, these cities are the putrid open wounds of our nation's culture and political life.
That's
Look
where
at the
we
recent
are
elections in New York,
at
where the
most.
Red-Green Alliance, radical left communists with
Fuck
radical
over.
Muslims, are hoping to turn New York into a medieval cesspool. Consider Daria Litsa
Yeah.
Chevalier, the radical
gonna
communist
destroy
and
it.
Muslim convert Mamdani just helped send to Congress.
Look at it.
Before she deleted her X account, she called the abolition of police, prisons, and borders the only moral way forward. She called her own country, the United States, an effing disgrace,
Look at that.
and posted that she wiped her hand on the American flag. The day after the October 7th massacre, she stood at a rally with signs saying, "Resistance is justified when people are occupied," justifying the October 7th terrorist attack, a rally so extreme that even Mamdani didn't attend. This is
Oh my
USAID and Gene Sharp in America, the Rainbow Revolution. But it isn't working. It's not under control. The street activists, now think they're the ones running the show. That's never how a color revolution works. The string pullers like Obama and Carney want to tack to the center to maintain optics, like they did in Maidan. You have to have the pretense of normalcy for the revolution to work.
Right.
If the Nazis, communists, and radical terrorists think they run the show, there's little the lawyers and media can do to control the narrative.
Right.
Senator John Fetterman said it on Hannity. These are the pro-Hamas wing. A lot of these candidates are just declaring a war on regular Democrats.
Right.
This has become
Expose
the
them.
dancing days
Expose them
of the
for who they
dirtbag
are.
left. This is why the Save America Act has become the cornerstone of Trump's summer campaign. He's using Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence to raise the heat. Because if the Senate cares about any one thing, it's the intelligence community. Trump even paused his nomination of Jay Clayton as DNI until things move forward. He's also pledging to hold up the FISA 702 surveillance power until he gets election reform. Yet the GOP Senate remains petrified. They're taking another recess. This whole process isn't pretty, and it's uncertain, and this breeds cynicism. But if Trump has taught us one thing, it's this. When you can't get a win, then create sufficient disruption until you can. Get people screaming and moving if that's what it takes. Break their fixed positions. Operate based on what's right and true, and then keep pushing. Reason can prevail, but only if you fight. The color revolution in America has been waged for over 10 years. It includes Russiagate, Ukrainegate, the caravans, COVID, J6, and the riots in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And it's all failing. They haven't eliminated Trump. He didn't run away like they thought he would.
Yeah.
Now election rigging is all they have left.
Yeah.
South America is already shifting. Europe is on the brink. The patriots are rising across the continent. The pressure is entirely on the Dems, and now their lunatics are running their asylum. And that's where we focus. Hit their weakness and mobilize. Be prepared for riots and chaos this summer. The Dems have a lot to lose and have no new tactics. But we can save America. And that's the overview. Click like and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter, and thanks for watching.
Thanks everybody for watching and hanging out with Soros.